radical call to action for the nourishers and nurturers to lead how we heal as a community. We are celebrating 150 years since the activist Julia Ward Howe called for peace to be an annual brunch. So today we are reclaiming Mother's Day with the vision of peace and hope. And we believe that Julia would have spoken to the healers and nurturers regardless of race, gender, sexual identity, in the name of trauma-informed peace building. And we can't have peace until we heal. And so today we are talking about how we flip the script and how we have the power to write the script for the future. So the process for today, we've carved out an hour of time for our panel discussion. And after introductions, we'll ground our talk in history. And we'll have a short video. And then we'll talk about where we are now. And then we will wrap it up with where we're going in the future. And so the takeaways are really about how can we return Mother's Day to its roots, a call to action in the name of peace, and how the global compassion movement can be a vehicle for this call to action. So allow me to introduce our panel members. So in today's lineup, and I'll start with myself as your moderator, my name is Tanya Beverly, and I am an author, poet, and a chaplain. I'm originally from South Central Los Angeles, and I arrived in Sacramento in 1991. I am the project director for the African American Suicide Prevention Project, The Living Room. I am recognized in the community as a transformational leader. My expertise includes personal and organizational development, and I retired from the state of California as a chief learning officer. My specialty is spiritual retreats, personal development workshops, and executive coaching. And I am the co-founder of Wisdom Works, producing the annual Women's Spirit Rising Retreat. As the executive director of Real Cream Cafe, a social justice theater group, I produce shows and activities that raise the consciousness of the viewer. And I believe we have the power to raise the vibration on the planet. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. My esteemed panel member, Ms. Pauline Hayes. Pauline is a life coach with the uncanny ability to help you identify what truly inspires you. She helps you focus your life around those things that bring you joy, peace, and satisfaction. She also delights in officiating sacred marriage ceremonies. Pauline has navigated the daily challenges and opportunities of living in 3 different countries. In addition to many volunteer hours of working with people living with AIDS, crisis intervention, and serving on the Board of Art Community, Safe Black Spaces, and other heart-related endeavors. Her varied careers have included massage therapist, hospice healing touch care worker, radio talk show host, personal chef, event planning, leading women's workshops and retreats, art curator and promoter, and among other things, the words that sum up her philosophy of life: shift happens. Another esteemed colleague of mine is Miss Joan Marie. Joan is the owner of Compassion Central in Carmichael, an educational sanctuary for peace. She is the co-founder of Compassionate Capital Region and Compassionate Ambassador in Sacramento. In private practice as a massage practitioner since 1990, she is a conscious touch educator and VP of Healing Hands, Healing Hearts. Joan coordinates the United Nations International Day of Peace and Interdependence Day in Sacramento. She's an artist, a mother, a grandmother, and she is a part of the Compassionate Art Council and the Chartered Women and Girls sector. She is a steward of the Red Tent here in Sacramento area and leads for the Peace Whole Garden Project. Her life's work has culminated to the year 2020, beginning with the 150th anniversary of the Mother's Day Proclamation, a template and call for mass awakening and empowerment for all human beings here and now. It is time. And one of our male counterparts who couldn't be with us today, Mr. Russell Jernigan Jr., we know that he is here in spirit and that this work is just beginning, and there are many opportunities for him to join us in the future. All of your panel members are a part of Compassionate Capital Region, and we serve as compassionate ambassadors here in Sacramento. And so to start off our discussion, I'm going to turn it over to Pauline, who's going to start out with the history of Mother's Day.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And I just want to say thank you to all the people who've decided to join us today. It's an absolutely gorgeous day, and you could have a million things that you'd rather do, but thank you for choosing to be with us. And before I start, it's also important for me to give thanks to the ancestors whose shoulders we stand, because without them, we could not be here today. And before I go, I need to mention the name Ahmaud Arbery. Ahmaud Arbery, and that's really, really important, seeing what's happening now. So, the origin of Mother's Day goes back to the era of ancient Greeks and Romans. But the roots of Mother's Day history can also be traced to the United Kingdom, where Mothering Sunday was celebrated much before the festival saw the light of day here in the United States. The more recent history of Mother's Day dates back to 1600s in England. Here, a Mothering Sunday was celebrated annually on the fourth Sunday of Lent, that is the 40-day period leading up to the Easter, to honor mothers. After a prayer or service in church to honor Virgin Mary, children brought gifts and flowers to pay tribute to their own mothers. Thanks to the hard work of the pioneering women of their time, Julia Ward Howe and Anna Jarvis, that the day became into existence. Today, the Festival of Mother's Day is celebrated across 46 countries, obviously on different dates, and it's a hugely popular affair. Millions of people across the globe take the day as an opportunity to honor their mothers, thank them for their efforts in giving life to them, raising them and being their constant support and well-wisher. You know, I'm sure that the original sentiment of Mother's Day is still here, and it's become a $1 million industry. We have Hallmark, we have restaurants, we have that, and it's a beautiful way to honor your mother. And before I turn it over to Joan, I would just like to honor my own mother, who departed some time ago, Desmond James, and my grandmother, Rebecca Barnes. As mothers, we always have to make sure that we honor those who are with us and those who are no longer with us. Yeah. Thank you, Joan.
Oh, thank you, Pauline. And yes, we want to honor all those who have come before us and those who will come after us, you know, that this is about who we are right now. And what happened for me was catching up with the history of what Pauline has mentioned. Julia Ward Howe wrote this in 1870. So if you can imagine what the world was like right after the Civil War, that, you know, there was a lot of devastation and division in the country of the United States. And what she wrote and what I've learned for myself, stepping into my empowerment as a crone, that there are life lessons that we learn along the way, and that in our elderhood, we have an opportunity to share that with others. That I believe when people are speaking truth with a capital T, that it can move through and outside of time. So it literally becomes a timeless statement. And I feel that the Mother's Day Proclamation is a perfect example of that, that there are some mentions in the proclamation that are outdated, like the plow and the anvil. However, the words that she is saying, I think, could apply to the moments today. One example, we will no longer have important questions answered by irrelevant agencies. There are so many questions that need to be answered right now, and we're being inundated with ineffective and a lot of information that's not required for us to move forward in a helpful and healthy way that supports our well-being as a collective, and that's important. So with part of what happened for me that I wanted to share is and ask you is to think of a time where you've been guided by spirit, where it's something that's an internal process, not external. And so other people may not understand it. But 10 years ago, I was asked by Spirit, whatever you want to call it, God, whatever, goddess, but I was called by Spirit to pay attention to the Mother's Day proclamation and also the year 2020. So as I did research on that, 2020 it celebrates the 100th anniversary of the suffragette movement, which was the 19th Amendment of women's right to vote. But it's also the 150th anniversary of the Mother's Day proclamation. And throughout time, women have been collectively disempowered. And it's time for us to stand in our power, but nobody's going to give us that power. We have to empower ourselves and claim that. And so that's part of what this call is about, is how do we support each other in that process? So thank you, Tanya.
Thank you, Joan. So with that, you know, many of us are familiar with the history of the women's suffrage movement. And I'm not sure if many of you are aware of the role that Black women and men played in the movement. African-American women were a big part of the suffrage movement and are often overlooked in history. They were side by side in this process. The 19th Amendment was all about denying women to vote. And Black women worked side by side with the white suffragists. Before the Civil War, Black and white abolitionists joined together in common cause. There was a small cohort of formerly enslaved and free Black women. They joined together, and you may know some of them: Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Maria Stewart, Henrietta Purvis, and Mary Ann Shea Carey are just some of them. And did you know that they were joined in their advocacy by prominent Black men, including Frederick Douglass, Charles Redmond, and Robert Purvis? Well, all of these folks worked in collaboration on women's rights, and then they joined together with Elizabeth Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. And in 1851, a former slave, Sojourner Truth, delivered her famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech at the National Women's Rights Conference. And by the late 1800s, the movement was splintered over race after the Civil War. There were arguments over the rights of former slaves and the new meaning of citizenship. The interracial Philadelphia Suffrage Association endorsed both women's and Black men's right to vote. The purpose of the proposal of the 15th Amendment, which would enfranchise Black men, but not women, interracial and mixed gender coalitions began to deteriorate. And the suffragists had to choose between insisting on universal rights or accepting the priority of Black men. So Elizabeth Cady and Susan B. Anthony severed ties, and they formed their own movement, insisting that Black men should not receive the vote before white women. Stanton and Anthony racist remarks about Black men invoked intense anger, and Black women incorporated Black male suffrage as an important component of their suffrage goals. Black women were a part of both groups. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony led one, and the other was led by Lucy Stone and Julia Ward Howe. The discrimination against Black women continued in the Stanton and Anthony group as white women sought the Southern white male and female support. Anthony and Stanton persisted, but so did the African American women's courageous battle for both gender and racial equality. So despite all this important work by Black women, the mainstream suffrage movement continued its racially discriminatory practices, even condoning white supremacy ideology in order to garner Southern support for the white women's voting rights. In 1895, Susan B. Anthony shared with Ida B. Wells that she asked Frederick Douglass not to attend a convention and to be on the stage at that time because it would offend the Southern host. As the suffrage movement moved into its final phase, it reflected a different reality that was not inclusive. At the inauguration parade of Woodrow Wilson, the first president from the South, white racism worsened. Ida B. Wells was asked to march at the rear of the parade. Then she was with the white Chicago delegation, She was a big part of it. But in keeping with her resistance and radical personality, Wells refused to join her fellow Black suffragists at the rear. Instead, she joined the all-white delegation. As they passed, Wells emerged from the crowd and entered the line between two white Chicago women, and she marched with them. This is why there is so much historical significance in the speech that Julia Ward Howe delivered on Mother's Day, later to be called the Mother's Day Proclamation. The proclamation was an appeal to womanhood throughout the world to unite for peace. And I believe that if Julia was here today, that she would say that we need to grieve together. And she would call for a general Congress of women from all nationalities, and that we would choose a place that we would gather and we would talk about peace, but most importantly, we would grieve together. And we propose the compassionate city of Sacramento, not that we're not already compassionate, but that this is where we're moving towards. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Joan. And Joan, if you can share a little bit about why you're so moved by this proclamation and you feel compelled to share this information with the world.
Thank you, Tanya. What moves me the most is, like I had mentioned earlier about moving through time, I believe she wrote a template as a guide for us that she was calling for some specific things, that it's time for women to own their power and come together to talk of the general needs of peace. However, we can't talk about peace and how that affects all nationalities until we come together as women to grieve over all that has been lost. And part of why I think that's so important, and I feel like Spirit guided us to do the symposium on compassionate living and dying, that grief, because grief is an uncomfortable emotion for humans to move through and maneuver through, that it seems to be avoided. When there's a loss that someone goes through, they may only get, a week off of work. Well, you're in that numbness of whatever planning you're doing during that time. That's not enough time to grieve. And we need to have a deeper understanding and tenderness around the process of grief. And why I think Julia Ward Howe's information is so important is that she had the brilliance at that time to understand. If you think about the Civil War and how families were actually fighting against families, it's where we are right now. It's a complete kind of carbon copy, just different costumes and scenarios, but the emotions are still happening, that we live in an unjust society right now. And we are at a time where the old normal no longer exists. And we have this opportunity to really come together and talk not only of the greater needs of peace, but to come together and really make sure that we have all nationalities present at the table, and that we can look at things beyond gender, that when we talk about the nurturer or the healer, that these are higher qualities of what it means to be male or female or whatever sexuality you identify with, that this is part of the higher elements of being a more evolved and mature human being. And I believe that if we can just kind of raise it up more to that level and support each other in that process, that that is more of the template that will create effective change. Thank you.
Thank you,
Can I
Joan.
just add something here?
Sure.
I think our wounds are actually crying out for this change to happen. And the divine feminine in each and every one of us knows that there's something bigger. It's like watching a plant grow. It starts very tenderly, so it has to be nurtured. So we have to be in a place of how do we nurture that divine feminine and the grief. And I think we have to cry copious tears, alone and together, but more so together, before we go through the tunnel to the other side.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you.
There's always gifts in grieving. And that's part of what has been the goal of Compassion Central and the work with Chill Sacramento and that whole symposium, is that we need a collective support as ambassadors of compassion to hold space for people to grieve, because there are gifts in our evolvement from going through the grieving process. It's how we grow and evolve. And so like Pauline was saying, that if we think of ourselves as the sacred gardeners, that plant has to go through an uncomfortable and, kind of suffering of the shell to break, and our hearts break open, but they don't break apart. We just expand into what is blossoming inside.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Joan. So next, we have a video. And the video is reciting the Mother's Day Proclamation. And remember, these words were written 150 years ago by Julia Ward Howe.
Thank you for being here. We definitely appreciate you, Sacramento. We're getting ready for our next speaker. Y'all ready to be inspired today for our female leaders? I want to welcome Elaine Whitefeather. She's the founder of A Community for Peace. And we also have Tanya Beverly, a Compassion Sacramento ambassador. Please make some noise. We are honored to deliver and recite the Mother's Day Proclamation written by Julia Ward Howe in 1870. This is the 150th anniversary of this writing.
Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be of that of water or of tears.
We will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause.
Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs.
From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with ours. It says, disarm! Disarm! But war is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence indicate possession.
As men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war, let women now leave all that may be left at home for a great and earnest day of council. Let them meet first as women to bewail and commemorate the dead. Then let them solemnly take counsel with each other as to the means whereby the great human family can live in peace, each learning after his own time the sacred impress, not of Caesar, but of God.
In the name of womanhood and of humanity, I earnestly ask that a General Congress of women without limit of nationality may be appointed and held at some place deemed most convenient and at the earliest period consistent with this object, to promote the alliance of the different nationalities, the amicable settlement of international questions, the great and general interest of peace. it up for Elaine and Tanya coming to represent for peace. How y'all feeling, women?
While we talk about women, you know, there's something to be said for the men who've always supported us. And they've always been there, despite what somebody would say. I would just like to read something that was written by this amazing brother, and he's no longer alive, so in case anybody knows, this is written by, it's just a couple of lines from a speech by Frederick Douglass. And this was written in 1852, so please listen carefully. It says, whether we turn to the declaration of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future. Doesn't that tell us that we have work to do? That was in 1852.
Wow.
And it's still relevant today.
Yes, it is.
We still have so much work to do. And you know, we can't just be pussyfooting around thinking that all is great. And before we get to the kumbaya place, again, we have to get into the muck of how dirty everything has been. That's when we begin to pull our strength and our energy and our fearless womanhood and manhood into making a difference for our children and our grandchildren.
I totally agree. And doing it, I think part of the power of grieving as a group in sacred circle, that hearing someone's grief about the inhumanity that has been done to them brings and touches the inhumanity of another person's behavior. And I think it awakens people to see that, you know, I've heard a lot of people say, you know, as a white person, that, you know, I didn't do this, that's old. You know, why is that being brought up now? It's our responsibility to bring it up for healing. We, as it's been said, we stand on the shoulders of people that have come they've come before us, and we're creating a future for those after us. So it's our responsibility for this present moment in who we are. And that's part of why I joined the Compassion Movement. Charter for Compassion is a global movement. And then locally we have Compassionate California, Compassionate Arts Council, Compassionate Women and Girls is international. And then locally, we are the Compassionate Sacramento. We passed the resolution in 2017. Not that we're magically compassionate. We still have a lot of work to do. But that is why Laura Hansen with Chill Sacramento has been working so diligently. And Susan Rupel, all of these people, and Tanya, we're all ambassadors, Pauline, that we are creating ways for people to gather. And I'm really disappointed that Russell wasn't able to be on the call, because he's a beautiful young man that is doing work in Sacred Circle to help the healing process. And we need more and more of those together. So part of the future, the question that's come up is what's in our future? And how do we move through that? And what I'm proposing is honoring Julia Ward Howe, and this year being the 150th anniversary, that I want to give an invitation for each of us to start looking at the threads that are the story of our individual lives. If you're involved in the peace movement or the compassion movement, what are the strings that connect you? What are the puzzle pieces that bring that together for you? And if you're not in the actual movement, how do you bring a compassionate renaissance to where we are right now? We're at a perfect moment in time for change, and that we need to create a new normal. So why not create a new normal that is filled with kindness and goodness? So
something just occurred to me, that when we're talking about kindness and compassion, It's not about an intellectual discourse. I'm talking about what are the nitty-gritty that we have to do. If my son is hurting, and if you can feel what I feel in my gut about the pain that my son is feeling, and if I can do the same for yours, that's when we're even beginning to get to that place. So it's not just about sitting around and say, yeah, we're compassionate, wouldn't it be nice for us to do that? It has to be much more tangible. It has to be much more in the trenches. Because you know what? There are people dying in the trenches. People are dying. Children are dying. Women are dying. Black men are dying in the trenches. So we have to get to the point of having the difficult conversations, because we cannot move forward until we have the difficult conversations. And you know, as we talk about the Women's March and all the things we do, notice that we have the Black Women's March and we have the Women's March. And so this country has been about division. So the work we're doing, it's really, really intense that we have to get down and dirty to bring them together. So if we can, for a moment, see women as women and men as men, then we can begin just a little bit to have that conversation. Then we can move forward into doing the work that still needs to be done.
Well, and thank you. Yes, that's beautiful. And I'd like to propose even more that good qualities of humanity are beyond gender. That each human being is capable of good qualities. And one of the things that drew me the most to the compassion work was a willingness to be uncomfortable. And growth happens when we're willing to be uncomfortable. And so I totally agree with you. And that's part of why with the work that I've done with compassionate women and girls is the red tent movement. And a red tent is symbolically just a safe space for women to gather and talk about different things that help empower women, not to fix anybody, but to allow women the space to come more into their own. And I believe that that's part of what we need to create more and more. So I've been working with compassionate women and girls, and also with Sarah for Hope. It's the number 4, SARAH, and the number 4, HOPE.org. And they are doing virtual red tents. And there is going to be one on Tuesday, May 19th at 1 p.m. And the subject is going to be the role of interfaith in crisis. So I think that will be really interesting, and that's Pacific Standard Time for the 1 p.m. So there's lots of things we can be doing, but right now I really want to propose, and this is, you know, kind of a radical proposal, I think, but we're in Sacramento, and I produced the Day of Peace from 2011 to 2015, and then I worked with Shift Network and did Day of Peace with them in the events that they were doing with Interdependence and California Vision 2020. And in 2014, the town of Carmichael, which is part of the county of Sacramento, but we did a peace flag ceremony of over 190 countries in the world, declaring peace. And we Carmichael represented the United States in a call for peace. And so I would like to be a voice for that for the year 2020, for September 21st, that we don't know what it'll look like. I'm not asking for anything irresponsible. It may be completely virtual. We don't know yet. However, we need to move towards that date with some kind of collective vision of empowerment and compassion in action, that we are creating something for that date to talk of the greater needs of peace. And my hope is that collectively we have more red tents here in Sacramento virtually, and talk of and grieve. We have incredible stewards that we created from the symposium, and let's empower each other so we can really collectively think about how we can change Sacramento to be the lighthouse that it deserves and has the potential to be. One of my favorite things that I've read is that Sacramento is the city of the sacrament, and the very definition of the sacrament is an outward sign of an inward grace. And that by each of us taking ownership of our grieving process, that we will evolve and mature to be a voice for our country, for ourselves, for us and every nationality collectively, and create better change. We need greater change right now. So, Tanya, you haven't said anything in a while, and I know you're a woman.
Oh, yes. I'm just waiting for that moment. I have a couple of questions for you guys. One of them is, when I hear the proclamation, I feel that it's relevant today. But if you were to revise it, what would you include? What would you add to the proclamation, if anything?
The only thing that I would add, and I'd like it to be kind of like an amendment, is that I think that there is power, there's a collective power in women communing. And that there is a time and a place where people of all genders come together. But I think that that's why the Red Tent movement is so important. Greta Grace is on right now, and I know she has been working diligently with that as well, that there are specific principles that happen in the Red Tent that is a sacred space for individuals that have come through in this moment in time in female form. And let's honor that. Mm-hmm. We live in a culture that has not honored the feminine. So collectively, I'd like to honor the Red Tent. I'd like to honor that as a sacred and safe space for women to speak their truth. And then at another time, hold it available with men that have been doing their work in men's groups. And I know Clay Atkin has been doing that with the Compassionate Movement. And I would love to see him in a leadership role with that, of bringing men that have been doing their work and women that have been doing their work. So we have more of a compassionate renaissance of an evolvement of our species of humanity. So that would be what I'd like.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, the one thing that we know is that I really love the perspective where she talks about that we have to grieve together. We've been grieving in our silos for so long that when we come together, there's no understanding of what my sister and my brother has gone through. Until I walk a mile in your moccasins and begin to understand your perspective, it's going to be hard for me because I'm not impacted by the things that you may have been impacted by. And so that lingering, that hollowing out, that craving for healing is so important in our community. But I think the most important piece is that we need to not only do our healing in our silos, we need to come together as a community, as a city, as a state, as a county, as the world, and honor that healing process. And what we don't do, I think it was Shakespeare, it says we don't allow ourselves time to mourn. And that's an important piece, is that mourning, that deep, deep call for healing is pivotal for us to become this collective and be able to move forward. And so I want to ask my esteemed colleagues here, when you talk about compassion, how can compassion serve as a vehicle for social change? What does that look like?
I think for me, compassion begins with the self. And, there's a saying that peace begins with me. So if we can be compassionate with ourselves in whatever it is that we're dealing with, we have to heal ourselves before we can step out to heal anyone else. And if the compassion starts with us, in our homes, the way we treat each other, the way we treat our children, our spouses, or our sisters and brothers, then we're actually beginning to lay the foundation. The way children are taught, that's how they will know what compassion is. And so it's something that can be learned, but there has to be the tenderness that goes with it. So you don't have to be too old to learn compassion. I think we can all learn it, and because we all have a lot to learn. We can speak, but can we hear, or are we listening? And that's part of the component of compassion. Does that make sense? Yes, it does to me.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think that compassion is, I probably already said this, but I think like love, it's an action. It's a verb that we collectively, we need to learn how to communicate better. We need to learn how to listen better. And we need to learn how to be more conscious with the words that we choose and how words hurt people. Words have power. And we need to be more tender with each other about that. And that's part of why I so honor the brilliance of her proclamation, because she knew the importance of grieving together of all nationalities. That's what I think is so important, because there is a natural wiring of women that we may not physically be a mother, but we have this link about caring about, look at the quotes, Mother Earth, that we care about where we live, and we need to be more effective in the process of change in how our country moves forward. This is the time for it. We're the 21st century. We need to update outdated ideas. We have ineffective agencies that do not serve the people in need. They serve the people that don't need. So we need to be more radical and have a clearer, stronger voice. And I think as women, that we have that stereotype of the shrew, that if we're saying it where we're angry or we're yelling about it, we're not heard, and so that's part of our empowerment. We really need to own these, this is the voice of our womb. This is the work of the vagina monologues of Eve Ensler of,
Yes.
We've been moaning for 20 years about the same thing. It's time we own our moan and really get out there as a collective. Even the Dalai Lama said, Western women are going to change the world. This is our moment. Let's gather collectively. Martin Luther King said, people who love peace need to learn how to organize as effectively as those who love war. Those are very, very wise words. And we have incredible heroes from our past and sheroes that, let's really come together and do this. I'm excited.
Well,
all you said was so beautiful, Joan. And if every time a Black man is killed unjustly, what I would like to see right now is the same amount of outrage that a Black woman is showing. I'd like to see my white sisters doing that. That is something that would say, you know what, we're really ready to work together. And it's not over 20 years we've been doing this. We've been doing this. In fact, there was a quote that was said that America was built in stolen lands from the Native Americans, from the Native Americans. And it was fueled by labor that was brought from Africa. So the depth of what we have to go through, it doesn't sound very pretty. And it makes me sound like an angry Black woman. And you know what? There is anger there because there's passion in everything that I say, just like there's passion in everything that you say. And I get it. And tomorrow we'll be out there again and we'll probably see the same thing. We'll see the little boys and girls being trafficked for sex. We see the homeless people. We see the people who don't have health care. will see all those things right here in the sacred city of Sacramento.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Pauline. Thank
There-
you, thank you. You know, we're talking about, when we think about healers and nurturers, what comes up often is that these are feminine traits. These are traits for women. You know, you talk about a compassionate environment, and women are always there. They're the first ones that show up. How can we get our men involved in this process? Because we need everyone as a part of this. What does that look like?
We definitely need more men's groups. You know, I think that's a big question. For me as an elder, I've been exploring the whole concept. I'm a product of the 60s, and now I'm in my 60s. And what does that mean? You know, that the 60s and 70s were a time of great change and possibility, and it got really watered down. And we had a war, and we lost a lot of really good men. And we shifted into greed. And there were, you know, even movies that were promoted. Greed is good. Michael Douglas said it, you know, and so we really need to observe that. Is it really good? No, it's not, you know, and that's what we're coming against, is the illusion of how we've lived, the illusion of what we've allowed to be acceptable. And that as women collectively and as a species, that's why I love this, is that when the earth is ravaged and the animals are dying, a new tribe of people shall come unto the earth from many colors, classes, creeds, and who by their actions and deeds shall make the earth green again. They will be known as the warriors of the rainbow. There's so much power in that. And it's the beauty and hope of, you know, like when we go into nature, how can anyone not be humbled by the power and beauty and grace of nature? And yet we destroy it all the time, and we've allowed it. And I think that that's what I'm hearing Pauline say. We need to learn how to maneuver with healthy moral outrage. We've lost our moral compass. We need it back, and we need to have a clear voice for where we're going. And it needs to include all genders, all nationalities. This old white men thing is over.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, you know, our time together is about a call to action, a call for action, movement. And so people often ask, well, you know, what is Minds to do? How can I get involved in this compassionate movement? And there are many ways that you can get involved. You can get involved within your own community. You can get involved in supporting organizations that are currently here in Sacramento. And we have some resources that are on the screen here. And with that, we have Pauline Haynes, who's one of our esteemed panelists. She's a certified life coach, and she also facilitates safe Black spaces. I am a district compassionate ambassador for West Sacramento, and we are doing things such as we have a Facebook page that's showing folks how to plant their own food, growing it from seeds, how to compost. And we've had an amazing response in the community. Folks that are putting in gardens for the first time, folks that have experienced gardeners that are sharing their knowledge. And I am also the program director for the African American Suicide Prevention Project, The Living Room. And we host online support groups such as Restoration Hope. And then, of course, we have Joan Marie, who is here, and she is one of the founders of Compassion Central as well as Compassionate Capital Region. And she is one of the major facilitators in Sacramento of the Red Tent process. She is a trainer, she's a facilitator, and she's a believer, and she does amazing work. And also there's Compassion, Chill Sacramento, which is sponsoring our event today. If you would like to become an ambassador in your area, check out the website for Chill Sacramento and see the many opportunities that we have. The one thing that we know that it is going to take all of us to pull this together. and we need to be in alignment. We can no longer leave anyone behind, because if I leave my brother or my sister behind, I am not going to be successful in the future. And we know that if we don't know our history, we won't know our future. And so this call to action is for each of us to know that we have a vital role in participating in what this new future looks like. We have the power to write the script. We do. It is now, not next year. 2020 is here, folks. We've been talking about it. We didn't know it was going to show up with COVID, but COVID is allowing us to expand in ways that we would not have expanded. It is allowing us to connect with heart, with soul. And I don't think we would have gotten to this place without it. So I am not negating the process of COVID. I'm including it as a part of my expansion. And so we are just so happy that you are here today. Are there any questions out there before we close, that we can kind of wrap our time up together? Not nearly enough time, but believe me, this is only the beginning. Only the beginning.
Talk to us if you want, you know.
That's my chaplain hat. Let me take my chaplain hat off.
That's right, that's okay. And you know, I just want to say that COVID has allowed us to get in touch with our vulnerability, because it's our vulnerability that will give us the strength. And I just want to share something that I did a workshop at Harbin Hot Springs years ago. I think my daughter was about 11 years old. And a woman wrote a song. I'm not going to sing it. But what she said, which is still pertinent today, she said, if every woman in the world had her mind set on freedom, if every woman in the world dreams a sweet dream of peace, if every woman of every nation, young or old, each generation, join hands in the name of love, there would be no more war. Because you know what? We have the power. We just don't use it. Ashe.
Ashe.
Bless all of you.
Blessed be.
I'll see you soon.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.